Hello there, I am Russell Ellis, and in this tutorial I will be teaching you how to use a .text file as reference for dialogue within a game. So the first thing to do is to have a specially formatted text file. The only formatting you need to have is specific to how you write your code, but generally you're going to want a conversation number, at least with how I do it, the who is speaking, the actual text, and how long you want that text to be on the screen for. Additionally, I have some tutorial text that is optional for each line. That's going to be extra text that is going to speak directly to the player and teach them how to play the game. So this method, this whole process is quite important for reducing the amount of code that you need to write in a game, and also for streamlining the process, as it's much easier to edit the actual dialogue itself. So what this method would replace is, instead of having to write out every single line of dialogue as, a couple lines of code that's like, 3 or 4 for each line, it's a lot of code. Instead, I can have this 70 line piece of script to compensate for 58 lines of dialogue, and I can add as many as I want, as many conversations as I want, and it's much easier to find whichever dialogue line I want in this pile in this document to actually edit the whatever it says, how long it needs to be stated. That's a much easier process to edit. So this script is written in kind of 4 main blocks. So the first block is kind of this top part here, and this is just declaring all the variables, all of the assets that this script needs to actually run. So all of this stuff is serialized, so that it's just drag and drop from the initial, in the initial scene. And so there's stuff like the text box in the tutorial. These are the 2 text boxes that are used. These 2 profiles, when I have fully implemented the speaking parts, those are going to be used to kind of turn stuff on and off and display who's speaking. Then there is this text asset, that is this file here, the text ref. This text asset is where we're going to draw the dialogue. Then we have some lists. These 2 lists are for initializing that dialogue and putting it into a form that can be easily read by the program. Finally, there's some more of the in-between and, still reading that. And so the second part here is just the start program. And this start program is going to deactivate anything that we don't need right now, like the profiles, because those are activated and can't have that being shown. And then the first thing that it does with the text reference is just to split it up by line. And so that's going to take every single line in here, for example, lines 1 and 2, and it's going to put every single line into a array. That array, what it's able to do is it's going to be able to store each line as a string, and it's going to be much easier to read. Instead of having to go through here, we can just go through an array, and that's easy to do with a loop. And then the second thing we do is convert each line into an array itself, because then we can access each individual part of the line. It makes it so that we can differentiate between actual text that we want to display on screen and, say how long we want to be on screen or which conversation it's part of. So that's another important part. And this is the startup part. This needs to run at the start, and we don't need to call it every time. So we can just create a large array, this dialogue list, and that array will be able to easily process the whole text document. Then the third and fourth parts, these 2 parts are able to actually run the dialogue. So this trigger part, this is when the script knows when and which conversation needs to be run. And so the main part with trigger objects is we're going to have in the Unity scene, like for example, this block here, this block is going to have, if we can find it, this block is going to have a tag. This tag tells the script to initiate conversations and initiate dialogue within the game. And so the whole thing here is that it is able to detect if the tag is an appropriate tag for the use, and then it will start processing that. So it'll convert that into a string that can be processed and stored. And then we're going to then the main thing here in this block is finding the actual conversation itself. So this whole script with this for loop, it's going to go down the entire length of this text reference document. And what it's just going to do is it's going to look at this first little part of the array, and it's going to determine which conversation it's part of. And so it's going to go down, and as soon as it finds whichever conversation it's part of, say we want conversation 6, once it hits this 6, it's going to set this boolean to true. And that means that as soon as we hit 7, we're just going to stop. The script is just going to stop, and there's no need to read through, given how we formatted it, and there's nothing going to be, no conversation that's necessary beyond where the initial numbers found. So that's going to set up the dialog list, and then the second part is just initiating that conversation. So it's going to get rid of the trigger object so we don't accidentally trigger the script again. That could prove problematic. And then it's going to start the coroutine, which is this part down here, and that's going to be the fourth part. And so a coroutine is an important part to understand when running dialog, and that is a function that can be run outside of a single frame. And so coroutines are defined by two major parts, which is the IEnumerator class. It's going to be what it returns, in addition to having these yield return boxes within them. And so in this specific case, it's going to run through with a loop, and it's going to run through every single part inside of this list of dialog. And each time it's going to display it, it's going to look at how long it needs to wait, and then it's going to use this yield return function, this yield return method, to actually wait that number of seconds until it's time to reset it, wait half a second, and then just continue with the dialogue. And so that's how this whole thing is gonna work. And so if we can go in here, it's we can see how it works. So if we enter into the game, we can see our beautiful player model. And as soon as we enter into this thing, it's going to disappear. And up in this left corner where the actual scripting is going to happen, you can see this dialogue. And there's that tutorial text I was talking about. And so the other main thing with this whole process is adding some more customization to the dialogue. And so in this case, I was using an extra font. And these extra fonts are pretty easy to implement, but they're going to take a little bit of outside help with some assets. So the one thing you're going to need to do is download a font asset and put it into the game or whatever you're wanting to use, put it into the game. That's the first step. From there, you're going to have to right click on it, then create Text Mesh Pro, and this font asset button is what you're looking for. What that's going to do is it's going to create something like this blue F. This is what you want. This is going to get all this font weight information, everything in here. This is what you need. And what you're going to do once you have your font asset is you can just come over here and you say, oh, look, this is the font asset we want. I could change it over here, or I could change it back to what I was wanting, which is this adventure script, which, it invokes the feeling of what game I'm trying for. So yeah, that's how you're going to use a .text file as reference for dialogue in your game. And overall, it's very useful. I can imagine there's a lot of other ways to do it. You can go even beyond dialogue. Maybe you have a cutscene that you want. Maybe that's a little bit of dialogue, but you could have cutscenes, or you could possibly even store what you want your program to do. Have some way to have it run through the program, and using a text file improves a lot of that. It really streamlines stuff. So as I said before, 58 lines of dialogue, that's going to take a lot of time to hard code it in. I remember when I was actually trying this initially, before I was suggested the idea of using this .text file, it was like 4 lines of code for every single line of these. So that'd be a lot. That'd be like at least 240 lines of code. It's really, it's been condensed into like maybe 100, and it's not that great on small scale, but it's really easy to expand as well. And so yeah, I mean, that's it. That's how you use dialogue. That's how you implement dialogue.